Hi everybody, it's Nikki and I'm here to do a video that is my personal experience, personal theory, no medical advice whatsoever. And I'd like to reiterate that Michael Stone, I'm going to say Michael Scott, Michael Stone, no medical advice whatsoever. I wanted to answer a couple of questions, and they're kind of general questions about the 670G and the Guardian 3 and everything else, but I really do want to make it clear that this is just my experience, and it has not been the experience of everybody, and it certainly may or may not apply to you. And I won't say it again after this, not medical, not medical advice. My experience. Okay, anyway, so you have received a 670G, and you've asked me some really good questions, and I told you it would be much easier for me to do this in a video than to try to type all this out. So I'm going to do my best. I've tried to come up with a list. You said your most burning question had to do with failed sensors on days 4 and 5. Just for the record, for a note, you're using the older transmitter. So the older transmitter, which is not version 2.2, that's the updated one. The older transmitter does have some really rigid rules. So you're kind of working with a tougher program right now. If and when you do get updated to the 2.2, it is an easier ride. It also comes with its own problems, and in fact, I've just had my third one die, which is very irritating. But it's not quite as finicky with the calibrations, and I do think that the sensors tend to last a little bit longer because of the fact that it's not as tight with the rules. Okay, so because my 670G is probably going to die any minute, I'll show you first where you can find the iSig, and then I'll come back to why I use it. Okay, so this is my pump screen. You can see everything is dead because I got my T-Slim connected to me. But from here, I would just go into the main screen, and I would go down to status, sensor, and I scroll all the way down. Again, everything I have is blank because my transmitter died, so I'm really irritated. I'd like to see an iSig right there, but I don't have it. But there's your iSig. In order to calculate your calibration factor, you would do your current meter BG divided by your iSig, and that will give you your calibration factor. And I will tell you that right now, since you're just starting in on the whole 670G experience, in manual mode, you don't want to calibrate above a 10 calibration factor, and in auto mode, you don't want to calibrate above an 8. I don't think you're quite there yet, but I have kids on the loose. In fact, they locked me out of my room, so I'm gonna see what I can get in before they bust the door down. Okay, so failed sensors on days 4 or 5. Here are some things I thought for you. How do you make them last longer? Okay, so my theory is that the calibration factor on these sensors, and especially with the old transmitter, the calibration factor is starting off higher. So whereas the calibration factor is often around a 4, 5, 6, for most of the time that we're stable and everything else, with the kind of bad sensors, sometimes they're starting at a 5, 6, 7, or even 6, 7, 8, which means that when we go to calibrate, the factor is too high and it's causing problems. So the reason we start to see more problems on days 4 and 5 is because that happens to coincide with the beginning signs of the degradation of the sensor. So typically on a good sensor, on day 5 or 6, I'd start to see some elevated calibration factors, and maybe an elevation would go that they've gone from a 5 to a 6 or a 6.5. But on the bad sensors, because they've started at a 6, they're going from a 6 to a 7.5 or 8. And then that's my baseline calibration factor. Then if I have a fast rising blood sugar, they're rising up to 8, 9, 10, 11. I mean, I've seen 17, 18. If I go to calibrate with that number, it's going to fail. And because I'm in the last couple of days of the sensor, a lot of what I'm doing, my blood sugar is moving, and I don't know, and I'm giving it a number where it appears to be okay, but that calibration factor is too high, so it's triggering a sensor error, a failed calibration, a sensor updating, and basically what's going on is it's just struggling in the last couple of days. So I'm doing it right now with my Guardian Connect, and I'll explain that difference again too. But right now with my Guardian Connect, I can tell you that the last couple of days, okay, well, it's not going to show anything, but you'll see this is the end of my reading for the last couple of days, and then it lost the signal. Well, this is actually an extended sensor, and this is day 1 of an extended sensor, and so it's struggling. It actually has the same calibration factor rules, and it's struggling. But what I'm doing with it is I'm not calibrating ever when I'm high, and I'm not calibrating when I'm on a fast rise. So even though I can't see my ISIG on the Guardian Connect, I'm still following those same rules. And I'm making sure that either I have a really low, stable blood sugar, or ideally I have a low and falling blood sugar. It is the safest time to calibrate. And when I do that, I can't change the fact that the calibration factors are staying elevated. But what I'm doing is I'm taking the burden off of it, and I'm giving it an easy chance to calibrate when I'm not testing it with those high numbers. I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever, but even on a crappy sensor that's on day 7, a fast dropping blood sugar that's, a 100 and dropping, or a 60 and dropping, that's going to have a really kind of low calibration factor and a safe calibration factor. So it might be a 4.5 or a 6. It doesn't even matter how elevated it started with. It's going to be just low enough that I can go ahead and get into calibration and not have a problem with it. It's not foolproof. Occasionally one just won't go through, but it's how I was able to extend my Guardian Connect, and I've just done a lot of it, so I know that's how it works. Okay, so that was one question. And then there are other things that cause, like the sensor updating and everything else, but in general, I think days 4 and 5 for you on the old transmitter with the bad sensors are probably marking the beginning of the degradation. And so basically you can kind of milk that sensor, and you should be able to get a full 6 or 7 days, but it requires you're on eggshells, and you are going to make sure that you're only calibrating at the most opportune times, and you're not giving it a reason to pay any attention to what you're doing. Also, Medtronic will replace sensors. So I know you mentioned having a prescription. The first thing is, as soon as you have a failed sensor, call Medtronic and get the replacement. They do also have an online, or they had an online way to order replacements as long as you weren't getting more than 2 within a 90-day period, I think. But I have to check on that. I don't know if it's still active or not. Okay, so what can you do once one has failed? 1, you can call Medtronic. 2, yes, you can yank it, and that wouldn't be a bad choice. If you were trying to make your sensors last for the full, month or whatever it is, you don't have to yank it. Now, once you've decided to restart a sensor, it may or may not work well, because it's entirely possible that the reason it failed is because those factors are just so crappy that no matter what you do, they're going to give you a hard time. So maybe you get another day out of it, but it's a really frustrating day. And so this is not to guarantee a great performing sensor, but what I have done is I've managed to bring back the sensors that have been told to change after 2 failed calibrations, bring them back and use them for another day or 2, and even stay in auto mode again, as long as you're kind of walking on eggshells. So you don't have to ditch a sensor that you've been told to change. Sensor updating can be very frustrating, but I do think that on days 5 and above, I do think that what's triggering it is those higher calibration factors. You can't avoid it. There's nothing you can do during a sensor updating, so you just have to kind of wait it out. But the more stable and on the lower end your blood sugar is, in general, it will probably do that less. So it's a little bit of motivation. I think I just heard trophies fall. So it's a little bit of motivation to kind of keep your blood sugar nice and not all over the place. The Guardians don't like, none of the sensors like all over the place. My Dexcom drops my signal when I'm all over the place. So they don't like that, and good for them, because they shouldn't settle. Okay, so what can I do once it has failed? I can go ahead and restart the sensor. If you need instructions on that, then I can do that in another video. Oh my God, about 10 minutes. Okay, what sets them up for failure? A rapidly changing blood sugar is a disaster. And the more the more stress you're putting on it on days 5, 6, and 7, the more likely the sensor's just going to go kaput. I think that as long as, and I think you're a pretty stable guy with your blood sugar, as long as you're staying kind of stable and calibrating at a good time, and not sending any numbers to it when you're not in the middle of a good time, I think that maybe you could get a couple more days. I hope I'm not saying all this and then you're already doing all these things and still getting 4 days. 10.5 minutes. I'll come back. Okay, thanks for watching, and I have another couple of videos. It's all just 670G talk and Guardian 3 talk. I don't know if it will help at all, but that's how I do it. So, okay, bye.